making these sort of things available so people can do interesting things with them. And now we're going to hear from the other side, from Phill Jones. He is the Vice President of Business Development at a company called Labtiva. They're an educational software company. They have some financial backing from Macmillan's digital science offshoot. And their main product is something called ReadCube. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a reference manager, discovery tool, and article reader. And Phil's going to sort of talk about things from that developer side of the story and maybe try and give us a sense of what publishers can do to get their material into these new tools.
Okay, so just start this up. Excellent. So thanks very much for that introduction. As David said, we're Labtiva, and our main product is ReadCube, and it's an academic document discovery and management product that is designed for the 21st century in the way that academics and scientists particularly access literature. And as I said, we're associated with the Digital Science Project from Macmillan, and actually Altmetric is one of our sister companies. So it's good to hear them getting some reps from Michelle over there. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'll start off by giving you a little kind of brief introduction as to why ReadCube was originally envisioned, and then I'll talk a little bit about kind of where we're going in terms of our relationships with publishers. So we all know that there is a problem of information overload in academic literature today. Actual fact, I think Clay called it, it's not information overload so much as filter failure. The problem is that we are, ever since the inception of academic publishing back in 1665, we are effectively doubling the output every 20 years, and last year we produced something like 1.5 million academic articles, which is a tremendous amount of literature for anybody to try to read. So a lot of ideas have been posited to how we can help scientists and academics deal with these issues, and certainly social networking solutions have gained a lot of ground here. The problem is with social networking solutions on their own is that they simply create more work for the academic. They give them more leads to follow, and not necessarily the case that those leads are going to be good ones, that they're going to lead to the literature they're interested in. And this is a quote from Bjorn Brems. Michelle referenced some of the discussions about the cost of science. He's an advocate for open science, but one of the things that he said in one of his blogs is that looking through all of these leads from all of these kind of students and so forth takes about 12 to 14 hours every week, and that's just looking for information. Never mind actually reading it. So that's a tremendous amount of time and effort that people are spending just kind of trying to cope with the amount of information that's available to them, never mind actually reading it. One of the issues is that the current acquisition pathways have multiple stages involved in them. An academic might identify a particular piece of literature they're interested in. In this example, it might be from searching PubMed, but it could be a reference in a paper. And in order to kind of track that down, they can't just necessarily click on the reference because, you know, in the PDF, the reference isn't clickable in the vast majority of cases. They just have, you know, a written reference, and they have to kind of track the whole thing down. So they go to some discovery tool. In this example, they're a Harvard researcher, and they got to find it at Harvard. And that works through Ex Libris, I think. And basically, they're given a number of different link resolutions and hosting services they're directed to. Some of them have got the right link, some of them have not got the right link, and so it takes them a little bit to find the actual paper that they're interested in, and then they finally download the paper, and then the cycle starts again. Now, as an ex-scientist, I can tell you that this chain of events can take a little longer than you want it to. It can take like kind of 5 minutes, even 10 minutes sometimes if it's a particularly problematic paper. And the research tells us that scientists spend about 20 minutes reading each paper. So that's a significant portion of the time that they've allotted to their literature search that they're spending wrestling with these tools. So we thought that it'd be a good idea to kind of improve on that situation. And another issue is that the life cycle of an academic article is becoming more complex. I once saw a talk by Dan Pollock, who's, I think he's Associate Director of Nature.com. And he said back in the old days, we used to typeset these articles and then bind them up and ship them out and forget about them, in essence. That there's definitely a stop at the point of publication, and that was the end of the conversation between the publisher and the academic. That's not true anymore. It hasn't been true in science for a while. It's increasingly getting less and less true in other areas like social sciences. There's all sorts of things going on from discovery. Academics are doing literature searches. They're looking at alerts. They're doing database searches. You go to survey and preview where people are looking at abstracts or looking at the full text HTML version and deciding whether they want to acquire the article. Link resolution and bookmarking are involved in that stages. People find an article, say, this is cool, I'll send it to all my friends. That's happening at that stage. Then acquisition, which is generally, for the most part, a PDF download. Then reading, which involves personal library management. You've got all of these PDFs on your hard drive. You've got to sort them all out. Annotations and highlighting, you've got to make notes so that you can make sense of it 6 months later when you pick the paper up again. Then real content use, recommending it to your friends when you've actually read it and understood it. Identifying references that you want to follow up in the next stage of particularly when you're doing the deep literature search phase of your research. Comparison and discussion when you're actually writing something to be a new manuscript. Citation when you're actually citing it before you send it off. And then back into discovery once you've identified those references for your next round, and around and round and round you go. So I'm just going to introduce ReadCube very, very quickly. And I'm not, much as I would like to spend the next 10 minutes selling you ReadCube, that's not what I'm here to do. What I will briefly say is that ReadCube was designed as an intuitive interface which was designed to cover the entire life cycle of the article. We've got acquisition tools, we've got search tools involved in there, we have a document manager, a citation manager, and we have a custom reader, which I'll talk a little bit about some of the advances that we've brought to the reading experience and how they kind of tie together and create a reading experience that leads into discovery and then makes that cycle a lot easier for the researcher. So without going into too much details, I'll shift gear a little bit and talk challenges that we've faced, and then hopefully there are some kind of lessons that we can share about how you can make it easier perhaps for people from my perspective to develop tools which will then help you reach your audience in a more efficient way, and then have them reading more of your content and boost your counter stats and all that good stuff. So most articles, so the challenge of OpenURL links, which is the thing that I alluded to with that kind of multi-step thing. So we want to simplify that, and we have simplified that for the vast majority of articles that that people view through ReadCube. We have this kind of cascading login system where ReadCube will check the publisher's website to try and find the PDF location. If you don't have access to it, and ReadCube works with institutional proxies to assess whether you have access to it before it attempts to download it. It will look at PubMed Central or any of the other kind of repositories and databases where the researcher might be able to get it, and then there's a single click to download the article. Now, for some articles, the PDF location on the publisher's website is not consistent. I think that we mentioned earlier in this session that there are some inconsistencies in metadata and and web structures and things like that, and it's certainly not unique to OUP. We find that there are plenty of issues with things not being exactly where you would expect them to be, and so that's problematic. And so we work with publishers, and when we have publishers that we have partnerships for, we make sure that that database is good for that publisher. If we don't have a partnership, then we do this kind of automatic crowdsourcing solution, which is basically we ask the researcher when they click on the find article on the web, if ReadCube can't find it, it doesn't say download article, it says find article on the web. It follows the DOI link out, and then it asks them to find it, and then ReadCube remembers where it was to build that database to make sure that the next person can then download it with a single click. Always provided, of course, that they have legitimate institutional access to that content. So that's one of the ways in which we're trying to accelerate that, but that could be a lot easier if there was more consistency in the way where PDFs are placed on websites. So that would be something that would be helpful. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with this metadata. So we start off with the document. Let's say a researcher imports their document into the ReadCube application. Now, I know I haven't told you an awful lot about how the ReadCube application works, but one of the things that it does is you can drag in your library of PDFs, it will catalog them, and it will individually resolve them, figure out what they are, and it will gather the metadata to create your own kind of citation library on your computer. So it starts off by looking for the document, look at the document and identifying the DOI, which is the kind of the center of this web. And then it will go to Crossref, and it will get the title, the citation, the publisher, the authors of the DOI link out. it will go to your PubMed and get abstracts and references, related articles. It will go to Google Scholar and get citations and related articles, and it will go to the publisher's website, and provided it has access, it will get full text, and it will download. It will get the download location for the PDF if it can find that, get supplementary information, and gets references. So it combines all of these things from all of these different places and pulls it all together. And one of the things that we do with this is that we create what we call the enhanced PDF. Now, this stems from the fact that the vast majority of academic readers seem to want to read the PDF. When you talk to publishers, and they look at their statistics, they find that upwards of 90% of reads are coming from PDF downloads. That people go to the website, they identify the PDF link, they download it, and they effectively kind of bounce off the site. So we know that there's a strong preference for that. But on the other side of that, the HTML version, full text version on the web page, contains all of this enhanced material. It contains things like supplementary information, editor's notes, links to news and views articles, all sorts of different things that publishers have created that are of good value to researchers, but they don't necessarily access because they've just kind of grabbed that PDF and run away with it. And what we find is that people will read the PDF and then they'll get to the discussion of something. It says, as further explained in supplementary 1, or see supplementary figure 2, or methods in the supplementary, or whatever it happens to be. And they tend not to go back to the website to find it because it's just too much trouble. They just kind of take it as read and move on. And so what ReadCube does is it takes that metadata from the publisher's website, takes that supplementary information, downloads and combines everything in a single unit so that information is already there, so that the researcher can simply access it by clicking on it. And our experiments with Nature have found that we've increased the supplementary information conversion rate significantly by something like a couple of orders of magnitude. It's been a really big kind of leap in conversion rates for them. And another thing that we do is that we combine the inline references in either the HTML or the XML feed, and we overlay it to the PDF, and then we create clickable inline references and citations within the PDF document. And that's very powerful, because what that enables the researcher to do is to simply be reading the document, see, that's a citation I want to follow. They click the citation appears, is actually the list of references then gets narrowed down in the little bar on the right there. They can click on that, and then that takes them to that kind of PubMed search for that particular DOI, or it uses Google Scholar and searches for the title. It finds that article for them. They can download that, add it to the library, be reading it in a matter of seconds rather than minutes. So we have to obtain this publisher metadata with the people that we're working with, and there's a couple of ways we can do this. In many instances, we've had to resort to using HTML and basically crawling the site and obtaining the information that way. It's easier, in a sense, to do that because the publisher doesn't have to do anything to allow us to do it. We just basically kind of reverse engineer their HTML for them, and then we kind of find all those locations and all those references and kind of sort it out. The problem is with doing that is that every time then the publisher wants to change the HTML layout, it breaks the crawler, and then we have to fix it. And so that's labor intensive, it's less efficient, and it's less reliable. And there is always the occasional article which doesn't conform quite right, and then we get users complaining about it, and it's not as efficient, it's not as good. What we prefer to use, and we're trying to encourage publishers to do, is to make available the XML version, either directly on the website or hidden somewhere where it's exposed to us so that we can ascertain it, and then you can take the XML which is very often already is a precursor to the HTML version, and then you can change that layer between the XML and the HTML version to change the HTML layout, and the XML stays the same, and then we can access that data without breaking anything. And we have a consistency, but at the same time it offers the flexibility for the publisher to be able to change the layout without having to then fix everything that's dependent on it. So going in, at an earlier stage, if you like. But there are challenges associated with XML. XML is a markup language, but the tags aren't predefined. Because it's the strength and the weakness of XML is that it's ultimately powerful. You can do anything with it. You have to define the tags, and then you put in, some data associated with that tag. But the thing is, because you have to define the tags, the tags are not necessarily consistent across publishers. Even within publishers sometimes, we don't have consistent schema for the XML. So there's no strong standard yet. The NLM DTD might be a good choice. I'm not sure. This is a matter for discussion. But certainly adoption has been a little bit patchy, and some of the publishers that we've worked with, that we've talked to, who say they're NLM DTD compliant, are not strictly NLM DTD compliant, in all of their articles. So it would be nice if there was a strong standard XML schema that everybody could rely on, and then that would make it easier to kind of tap into these kind of flows of information. So the case for a standard XML schema is this. If you have XML as your standard point of publication, you can then draw off to all of these different avenues of presenting that data. You can turn it into the HTML, you can turn it into EPUB, you can turn it into a mobile app, you can use it as the starting point for a PDF, obviously it has to be typeset, you can put it into ReadCube, and then I forgot about the other one and I just put a question mark there. No, that means that there are probably other ideas that we haven't yet thought of that will emerge in the future. The point is that XML is the flexible approach that allows us to be nimble and do, and innovate, essentially. Another question is what happens when content is updated. And this is an increasingly common scenario, and it's partly because the internet allows you to instantly update. And so, I shouldn't really say this, but in a sense, there's less of a sense of permanency for some authors, and so errata and addendums are becoming a little bit more common. The numbers of retractions are growing faster than the number of publications. But the good side of this, that's perhaps the dark side of it, the good side of this is some of the innovations that are going on in terms of EPUB ahead of print. Things like BMC have a provisional PDF, which they get out very quickly, and then they take the time to typeset it and replace it later. And so that's a way that they can get something out fast, but then get the high quality version, a little bit further down the line. But there's no good way to alert readers that an update has happened. They don't know unless they go and check. And certainly if it's something like a retraction, that can be very important. That researcher might be quoting the wrong piece of literature. They might get the wrong understanding from something. It's important that people are kept updated. Especially in this world of information overload, where it's, they're not necessarily, flicking through the pages of the Lancet every week to make sure that nothing important has happened. That information has to find its way to them rather than expecting them to go look for it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about APIs, and things are going to get a little bit technical and scary. But I apologize. I'll try to, I'll keep it simple. I must confess I'm not a developer myself. I'm trying to play one on TV, so it shouldn't get too technical and difficult. So one of the ways that this potentially could happen is that publishers could push information to an API of the tool producer. This is what's happening with Crossref now. That you push the citation information and the Crossref ID to Crossref. But the issue with that is that the burden of compliance is on the publisher. So if we've got multiple tools going on with multiple different APIs, that becomes impractical very, very quickly. I mean, it's okay if it's just Crossref, but what if it's Crossref and ReadCube and Mendeley and Altmetric and all the rest of them? It's impractical for a publisher to support 50 different APIs. That's just ridiculous. It's never going to happen. So that's not an ideal solution. And so another solution which could work is that the third-party app like ReadCube polls the publisher and asks whether there's been a change. So we say, article X, has anything happened to it? The publisher's API says no, or yes, here's the errata, here's the addendum, here's the retraction, or whatever it happens to be. But the problem is with this approach is how does ReadCube know when something has changed? Doesn't. Currently, the only way we could do this is either to just poll it every time the academic accesses that literature, which is okay, I suppose. It's not terrible, but if it's something that's important, you would really want the reader aware of it rather than relying on them to actually look at that article again. So one thing that could work is an RSS feed that the third-party application can subscribe to for alerts. So basically, each article has its own RSS feed. Every time something happens, every time there's a change, that RSS feed, ReadCube is tapped into that RSS feed. It knows to poll the API to get the full information. That information can't be in the RSS feed typically because that's too much information for an RSS feed. An RSS feed is just a single, simple kind of piece of information. The API then allows you to get much more in-depth information. So Another way of looking at it, perhaps a more immediately robust way, would be to have something called webhooks, which are client-defined server callbacks. In this case, the third-party app talks to the API of the publisher and says, we're interested in this article. So basically kind of dials in and says, all of these articles are the ones that we care about. And then every time there's a relevant change, the API knows, the publisher's API knows that ReadCube is interested in this article, so it pushes it. And there's no need for ReadCube to do anything back. All that happens, once it's subscribed, once it can constantly be pushed any relevant information. And that's pretty good. It allows us to kind of register, receive updates. And the burden of compliance is on us and not you, so that's pretty good. We can kind of cope with that. But an ideal long-term solution would be something like this. So this is what I'd like to kind of tentatively propose. This is a bit out there. Is what if we had an intermediary that kept track of all of these changes, and then every time there was a change, an errata, addendum, whatever it happens to be, or the final version rather than the provisional version, that's pushed to the intermediary, and then the third-party tool producer like ReadCube subscribes to each relevant article with a webhook, and then they get the information that way. That reduces the burden of compliance on both the publisher and the third-party app. It makes a single, centralized, consistent API that everybody can tap into, and then it centralizes and sends out information. So, in summary, 3 things that would make our life easier. So one thing is standardized URLs, at least intra-publisher, because PDF locations don't necessarily follow predictable patterns. If everything was a bit more standard, it would be a little bit easier. Like I say, ReadCube has a crowdsourced solution to fill in the gaps, but that's what it is. A standardized XML format. I really wish that there was a standard XML schema that crossed all kind of at least journal publication boundaries, maybe monographs, ebooks, and pivots and whatever else. But a good strong standard which is used as kind of like the central first base of publication, that I think would make a much more flexible, innovative publishing environment. And a better way to discover content once it's been changed. Early online publications of provisional versions, etc. Currently, we have to poll the content only when it's viewed by the user, and we would really like to see us, we'd really like to work with publishers to create a solution that would then, enable us to kind of receive that information and give it to our researchers, give it to researchers who are reading the content, when it becomes available, a way to push that out. So those are, my brief was to kind of create a series of calls to action, how, as a tool producer, how we see the world, and what, from our perspective, selfishly, we would like to do. And I hope that I've demonstrated some of the value that it would have for publishers in terms of getting their content to researchers more efficiently and more effectively, which would, increase usage, which is, at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants. Everybody wants scholars to be able to read scholarly content. That's what we're all after trying to do. So I hope that I've kind of explained, how some of these innovations will help.
So just to kind of finish off, a little bit of shameless marketing from the Shameless Commerce division of ReadCube. Currently, ReadCube exists in 2 forms. It's a desktop document manager and citation manager. It's also a software as a service based web reader. And we are currently looking for development partners to work with us to help us figure out exactly how publishers would like their content displayed in a plugin that works inside of their website. We're already on the Nature.com website. If you go to Nature.com, if you go to Nature's flagship journal and click on go to the full text page and click on View in ReadCube, some of their pages, I think like Nature Biotech, the PDF option brings a little pop-up and there's a ReadCube option on that. If you click on that, it will do a web-based, fully contained within the browser version of the ReadCube reader, which has all of these enhancements, combined with supplementary, with the clickable references and all the rest of it. And then that offers the user the ability to kind of download that article into their own database, and we're working on kind of social sharing and maybe making it work with other kind of citation managers and so forth. We're really interested in working with publishers to do that. So that's something that if anybody's interested in, please let me know. Let's start a dialogue on that. And we're also working on using ReadCube as an e-commerce platform for individual article sales and for some innovations in patron-driven acquisition. We already have a small trial going, which is due to launch in the autumn, in the fall, with the University of Utah. And we'd like to expand that trial. We'd like to get more publishers involved, and we would like to get more institutions involved to experiment with basically a way of, for that content that libraries don't subscribe to anyway, a way for them to acquire that content easily and quickly and very efficiently. Certainly now, to be frank, what happens is when a researcher tries to find
An academic article and they can't find it, very seldom do they actually go to the e-commerce system and buy it. For the vast majority of times they go to a colleague and and ask for a copy. They use back channel methods. They do a hashtag on Twitter, icon has PDF. If anybody's familiar with that one. In something I think that Mark Ware's report said that there was something like 5% of academics actually go and then buy it. Which is practically not happening. So in that case, wouldn't it be better if we offered a channel for them to purchase that content that was nice and easy and cost effective for them? So we're looking for partners, for people who are interested in participating in that experiment. And there are at the bottom my contact details, and that's all I have to say. So thank you very much for listening.
All right, that was great. I want to thank all of our speakers for a really informative session. We have some time for questions. There's a microphone there. I'll start with a general question. Something that's really been on my mind lately is the sort of question of control of these resources that are so important to the researcher. We're so dependent on things like Google and Apple and Amazon, and they're all really good, interesting companies, but they have very different goals than the academic researcher. So, for example, Google was built on the idea of providing the best possible answers for your search, and we've seen it shift now to becoming, well, here's the best answers, but also here's some promotion of Google Plus, other Google products. They just really crossed a line in including paid placement in their search results very recently. So I wanted to sort of ask, open up the question of your thoughts on the importance of building these things ourselves within both the academic community and within the academic publishing community to better build our own destinies. So any
I would say that one of the ways that we can control it better is through better partnerships with libraries, which have traditionally been the gateway for scholars to access content. Increasingly, we know that people are accessing content through Google and other external sources. As publishers, though, and libraries collaborate more to create better ways to share information, to make information discoverable within that specific universe, we might do more to filter out the other things and to move away from discovery through sources that have another agenda. And because libraries and publishers have a shared goal of trying to do this kind of connection.
I remember talking to somebody at Nature, I forget who it was, it could have been Dean Sanderson, and he was talking about, he was at a conference and the subject, it was like a kind of a round table thing, maybe one of these, post-conference kind of deals where everybody kind of just talks about stuff. And one of the questions is, why don't people read the HTML version? And it was a researcher actually pulled up an HTML version and he'd marked it up with kind of red ink, if you like, or, the digital equivalent of the content that he was interested on the page versus the content that he wasn't interested on, the adverts and so forth. And it was a mass of red ink. And he said this is one of the primary reasons, is there are too many distractions on the page. It's not an immersive reading environment. And I think there is a real risk of selling too hard, if you like, of always trying to attach a message, of always trying to get a message that from a commercial point of view you want the reader to be aware of. But I think that academics and definitely scientists are really quite averse to being sold things. I mean, they don't like it at all, and so it's important to kind of rein in that instinct to kind of push things, and we've kept the ReadCube interface very clean and avoided kind of too much selling from that perspective. From the publisher's perspective, provided you can supply content to people, it's its own advert. So from a commercial perspective, if you're providing links to enable people to consume content better, I mean, you're selling yourself, straight away. So there's no need to kind of push these, things.
Yeah, I think, on that point that we, everyone sort of mentioned the idea of information overload, and I think we've put a lot of effort into creating tools to give people more to read. Here's some articles like the one you're reading, because your stack of papers on your desk that are unread is only this high. Let's make it this high. Thoughts on the idea of less is more, of how can we offer tools to, it's almost counterintuitive for a publisher. We want to drive page views, we want to drive downloads, we want to drive readership. But what the readers are asking us for in a lot of ways are filtering tools. I want to read less. I have too much to read already. I think we all stand behind our content, and we think, well, our content is the high quality content that they really need. And I think in the long run, that's the approach we have to take and to do that. But thoughts on ways to filter things, to create tools so we're reading less instead of piling on?
Well, one thing I would say is something we've found in our products is offering personalization tools is sort of part of the basic demand. If you're going to publish, today you have to offer, your individual profiles with options for how we're going to push more and more, and increase that stack. But I think we need to take those registrations to the next level to some degree. Of course, there's privacy concerns there. But as far as not referring folks to hundreds of potentially related articles, how can we, engage folks? A lot of those individual registration tools are the lesser used items on our pages. And so we'd like to engage there. But I think it partly has to do with where you're pushing feeds or links to content has to do with understanding what researchers are looking for, where they are, what responds best, what fits in their workflow, and that takes a lot of time in really understanding which content needs to be in which universe. But it's something we have to do.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's partly about providing relevant content. And I touched on the idea of the kind of these social network solutions that people have come up with, where people are constantly suggesting papers, and and they're poor quality leads. But if you provide people with accurate leads, which are really what they are, truly interested in reading, then they'll follow those links and they'll consume more content, because they'll perceive that as a reliable way of obtaining content, and they'll read more if you can make that discovery process more efficient. So you can satisfy both aims simultaneously.
Can I just add to this? I think what we discovered, based on the work that we have been doing, is that it's very difficult to understand the researcher workflow, because we do some user testing. We interviewed 3,000 people. That's less than 15 or 20 million people that we are serving through our platform. So it's a very small subset. Now, a couple of things that come up. When we look at the tools, we have almost 130 plus applications now. And if we categorize them, there are filtration applications. How do you get to the information? How do you narrow down your search results and get to the right information quickly? But there are researchers who are looking at broadening their research. They don't want that exact information, but they want to know what is not known to anyone. So then you are like doing a blue sky kind of a thing. And there you need tools that can expand your search results and take you to the related stuff. So I think based on our experience, what we feel is, and that was sort of, the underlying theme of my talk, that researchers, they understand the problems, and if we are able to provide them some of these services, and by experimentation, different fields of research have different needs. Information overload, actually, I was thinking of, when you started by your slides, we also had similar slides like, 6 hours or 10 hours in a week that people are spending just looking for the information. So based on some of the research that we did, there are filtration tools, there are management tools, like the document management or productivity tools, and there are also analytic or search related tools that people need. But I think it's a very difficult problem to tackle. It's not easy. And definitely, different publishers, they have their own sort of silos that they're working in. But it is, if the researchers they are able to develop things themselves, I think that's one way of taking this forward.
Yeah, it reminds me of a molecular biologist I was speaking with recently who said, I know my field really well. I know what's important. You don't need to tell me what's important. You need to tell me what I don't know. And it's kind of that Donald Rumsfeld. There are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And the real challenge here is to figure out what those unknowns are and to get that information to the researcher.
But researchers are all different as well.
Yeah.
It's important not to think of them as
That's true.
monolithic. We've got one tool which is a recommendation engine, kind of like the Netflix kind of people who like this also like that. And amongst some users, it's tremendously popular. People rave about it. Other users say this is stupid. And a lot of people, they want to take a broad search and then narrow stuff down. And there's different users have different profiles and different personality traits. That mean they respond to different ways of finding information. So it's important to satisfy all of those different pockets of users.
What I think is interesting is that it's finding the solution is a moving target, since user practices are evolving at the same time that we're trying to solve them. And so part of this just you think is we must try to find solutions one way or the other. I feel more comfortable looking at my notes printed out than on the screen, but as people become more comfortable with the idea of having lots of links and other material on the page and can still concentrate on the content they want to see, some of this may just resolve itself as practices resolve themselves. Not to say that we as publishers and developers shouldn't continue to try to find solutions, because we're part of that dialogue, but we don't need to beat ourselves up, I think, too much about it.
All right, good. Well, I think it's lunchtime, and thank all the speakers once again.